Hey, welcome to Q&A, where you ask your questions on faith and life, and I do my best to give a biblical perspective. Well, let's jump into today's question. Here it is. Reading Psalm 66, verse 18, it seems to say that sin blocks God from answering my prayer. Is that right? Psalm 66, 18. Here it is. If I had not confessed the sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. Okay, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. It's, if I had not confessed the sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. In other words, if I had unconfessed sin in my heart, God won't hear. Is that what it's really saying? Well, first of all, let me just offer a couple of thoughts. If unconfessed sin in a person's heart prevents God from responding to their prayer, then I think most of us would have to say God's never going to respond to our prayers. I think the reality is that all of us at various points have some unconfessed sin in our hearts, an attitude, a thought, a behavior, or whatever. I mean, Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and fall short of God's glory. It's not just a one-off thing that we fell short, then we responded to God through Christ, and now we measure up. We continually to fall short. Just as the Israelites could never measure up through the law, in our own selves, we can never be right with God either. We continually fall short. So that should tell us that if we're always falling short, that at any given point we have unconfessed sin in our heart, that should tell us that maybe there's more in Psalm 66:18 than we first read. And so in that case, my advice is always go to another translation. And I think a good translation, let me just bring it up here. The ESV says, if I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. So it puts it in a slightly different context. It's saying, if I had cherished, in other words, if I delight in the sin that's in my heart, if I delight in doing wrong, or if I delight in doing something which I know offends against the nature and character of God, if I willfully want to hold on to a thought, an attitude, a behavior, if I choose to watch things, if I choose to engage in behaviors, etc., that offend against the character and nature of God, then it becomes a barrier in our prayer life. It's not unconfessed sin per se, it's our attitude towards sin. Why? Because our attitude towards sin is really a reflection of our attitude toward God. If we're saying, no, this sin's fine, I enjoy doing this, I enjoy this attitude, I enjoy this behavior, I enjoy whatever it is that we cherish in our heart, what we're really saying is, God, I prefer this over you. I desire this more than I desire your ways. And that's why it hinders our prayers. And so in terms of, the Psalm 66, when it's not saying sin per se, unconfessed sin per se in our heart is going to hinder our prayers. It's saying, what is our attitude towards sin? What is our attitude toward God? Obeying him as best we can, because that's what God responds to. I say that because, for example, in 1 Peter 3:7, he talks about how husbands needs to honor their wives. Why? Because they are weaker, but they are God's gift to us in life. And therefore we must honor them as we honor God, so that our prayers won't be hindered. In other words, what Peter's saying is that if there are times when your attitudes toward your spouse is going to hinder your prayer, because you're not honoring her as you should. You're not seeing her from God's perspective. You're not seeing her as an equal. You're not seeing her in the way that God calls you as a husband to see your wife. And as a consequence, you're not esteeming her and honoring her. You're not honoring God. And he says, and that's going to hinder your prayers. And so it's not sin per se. It's our attitude toward God. It's our attitude towards sin. If we truly love God with all of our heart, we're going to want to address sin in our life. We're going to want to to do all we can whenever we become aware of a behavior, a thought, or whatever it is that gets in the way of God, that offends against God. We're going to want to confess it so that we're as close to God as we can be. But Psalm 66 is saying when we fail to do that, when we say, no, I'm going to choose my way, my thoughts, my behaviors, my desires over God, then that's when God says, I'm not going to respond to your prayer. I can't respond because there's this thing in the way called pride. And until you address that, I can't respond. Second thing I just want to say quickly is that if you ever are in that position where you've been praying and feel, what's the point? God's not responding. God doesn't hear. That's never God. That's always the voice of the enemy, our spiritual enemy, the devil, trying to dissuade you from persisting in prayer, because we're told that we should keep on seeking, we should keep on knocking, we should keep on pressing into God, because eventually God will respond. Maybe not in our time, but He will respond. And that's the thing, is that if we don't recognize the voice of the enemy, then he's going to use circumstances, and he's going to use scripture, and he's going to twist it in a way to discourage us rather than to see us break through into everything that God has for us. So I hope that answers your question. We need to keep short accounts with God. We need to continually search our heart and confess whatever needs to be. And that's the attitude that attracts the ear of God more than anything else. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But hey, as always, if you have questions on faith and life, jump over to slido.com, use the hashtag askhamish. Love to hear from you. But that's it for now. Until next time, God bless.